Welcome everybody. I'm so excited to get this group of people together for a training. This is just really fun. I don't get often time to just hang out with all of you. So thanks for being here. I know there are a lot of different priorities that you're all managing as we end a fiscal year pretty soon here and start a new one. And I appreciate you taking an hour out of your week 3 to, as I said, be curious about accessibility with me and learn with me and get some training in this area. It's really, really important part of what we do. And to be candid with you all before I get into my presentation, I need you all to do this work as we create a culture of accessibility in our practices in a lot of different ways. It's way bigger than anything I can do on my own. I know that for sure. And I need you all as leaders to lead out in that with me. And so I appreciate you being here with me to create that culture as a team. And with that said, now that I've recruited you all to be members of the Accessibility Office with me, I'm going to go ahead and share my screen and get us started today. Okay. Make sure I'm getting the right screen. Here we go. All right. Well, thank you all. Once again, the topic that brings us here together this morning is accessibility best practices for virtual events. And my hope is for us to do trainings on different topics every once in a while, but this is what we're going to focus on this morning. And as I begin with us, I have a few housekeeping items just to set a kind of a tone for our time together and let you know how you can engage today. Feel free to use the chat this morning to throw in any questions or comments that you would like to share. I have designated Mr. Micah Pierre Palpent is going to be my chat monitor for today's meeting. And he has the power and the discretion to interrupt me at any time to help me not miss anything that I may need to capture in the moment. But I will pause a few times throughout the training to just stop and allow you guys a chance to ask questions or share something that you'd like to. You'll get a recording after today's training with additional resources as a reference that I'm going to make available for you. And I'm going to model some accessibility best practices as I'm leading this meeting with us today. So I want you all to be aware that if you would like to use the live transcript closed captioning feature in today's meeting, you can locate that in your Zoom menu bar and activate the subtitles that will provide captions for you. And I'm going to put some instructions here in the chat that navigate you to that as well. I will be talking more about this tool and really going into more detail about how it can be utilized and doing some training on the steps with it. But if you just want to check it out to get a view and an experience of what it's like to use as a participant, please activate it and follow along with what's going on there. Okay. So here are our goals for today. I do have some things I want to accomplish with you all in our time, and we're going to talk about these 4 different areas together. We're going to talk about why accessibility matters. Before we can talk about the what or the how and get into the nuts and bolts, we have to talk about the why. It's very, very important. We are going to discuss a little bit of some of our legal requirements associated with the content that we're going through today. I'm going to talk about some best practices that we can all adopt together to address the common barriers that occur in virtual spaces. And then I'm going to share some notes about requesting accommodations for virtual events and how we can go about that. All right, so diving right in, why accessibility matters. I know we all know that this is important. Making things inclusive of disabled individuals in our virtual world is a growing topic of discussion just at large right now. And COVID has really pushed this along to a greater degree as well. But some things to stop and think about as we get started is there's a lot of accessibility best practices that can be helpful, but I realize that we're just not trained to really stop and think about it much. It's not a part of our normal schema in terms of what we're prepared for virtual events. And we're so fluid now in being able to just hop onto a webinar or host a meeting like this, throw up a slide presentation, walk through everything we need to do, send out a recording and call it a day. And the truth of the matter is that not everyone can access what we are doing necessarily if we don't incorporate some practices that are inclusive of that. But we just don't know any better sometimes, myself included. So we can learn how to grow in these practices together to truly make things accessible in very simple ways. Secondly to that, we don't always know who's in our audience. When we are hosting, especially events for students, for outsiders to the university, we don't know who all of our attendees are. We don't know what barriers they may or may not be facing. And so it's important that we think about some practices that just help reach anybody who could be there and need some tools in place that make that possible. So we're going to talk about how we do this today in a virtual world. Furthermore, I don't know if you've noticed, but LAPU, our outreach in terms of the content we're creating and what we are promoting to audiences all around is expanding. It's really expanding. We're doing more virtually. And when I say we, I mean you all. Every department that's represented in this room, I aware you're a part of hosting webinars and virtual meetings that reach audiences of all kinds. And our reach is really expanding all over the place, which is awesome. It's so exciting. We're hosting countless webinars now, I've noticed. We live in a fluid culture of having virtual meetings with one another all day long. We've successfully facilitated 2 virtual commencements. We have a podcast. The list goes on. I'm sure you could mention a ton of other things that are happening that I'm not even aware of that we're doing, which is super duper cool. And we're engaging a lot of audiences, students, alumni, other guests and professional colleagues outside of the university, the general public. We've always been an online university, but we are reaching way more than just being an online classroom, more than just Moodle. We're way more than just Moodle nowadays. And I think everyone from e-learning can throw up a big amen to that. So with all these exciting things that we are doing and innovating in and leading out well, it is very important that we consider the importance of accessibility in our practices and the way that we are hosting events. We have a mission as an institution to create virtual experiences that are inclusive of disabled individuals in particular. And here's the payoff of all the best practices and things I'm going to teach you all about today. When we engage in them, when we implement them, here's the accessibility dividend that we all gain from that. And this is a term that I borrowed from someone else that I've done some training with. When we make things accessible in our virtual world, it means everyone can participate fully. Everyone can learn fully with ease. That means that our events are successful in accomplishing what we hope that they would do. And everyone benefits. Literally, it makes it better for everyone. We reach people in a better way, we grow, we accomplish our goals. It's something that causes everything to excel when we do this together. And as a byproduct, when we put forward a posture of being inclusive, then we do meet our legal requirements along with that too, which is important. And the legal requirements are really in place so that we're preventing an experience of discrimination, whether intentionally or unintentionally. We are putting measures in place to prevent that. And then maybe even most importantly here, last bullet point, as we create a culture of accessibility with our events, then it allows us to really lead with excellence and fulfill the DNA and the heartbeat of who we are at LAPU, which is modeling Christ as we include all people and create a hospitable space as we host events. So the payoff for doing these things is absolutely instrumental. Another foundational piece to just talk about with you all today is to give you a definition of accessibility. This is a term we throw out a lot in different contexts, but I wanted to actually define for you all, what does accessibility actually mean? So here's the definition. And this comes from the Department of Education and their Office of Civil Rights. And here's what they say. To make something accessible means that a person with a disability is afforded the opportunity to acquire the same information, engage in the same interactions, and enjoy the same services as a person without a disability in an equally effective and integrated manner with substantially equivalent ease of use. That is a mouthful. Here's my nutshell version for you all. In essence, when we make something accessible, it means that we are providing equal access to an experience without treating people differently. We're creating an environment for all people that's usable to the greatest extent possible without the need for adaptation or modification. This is what accessibility is. Okay, before I dive into the legal requirements piece, I just want to see if there are any questions that have come up in the chat, or if anybody would like to, you can feel free to unmute yourself, and now's a good time to chime anything in if you would like to.
No questions in the chat so far, but there was a little bit of banter about using the closed captioning and how it's helpful and almost like watching TV at home, except that it's you.
It's great. Glad you all are playing around with that feature and getting a feel for it. You guys will all be pros by the end of this training today. Okay, very cool. I'm going to move us forward and talk about the legal stuff a little bit. So before I jump into that, I do want to say that my heartbeat for us is that we make inclusivity and we make accessibility, we make equal access the motivation behind all of these things that we are doing. There are legal requirements as well, and I don't want to keep those a mystery. Those are very important. However, our main primary motivation for implementing any of this really should be focused on how we are creating an inclusive space for disabled individuals and really everybody who may benefit from these tools. If we just make the legal requirements our only motivating factor, we miss the point. And I want to make that super clear. The legal stuff is not to be the showstopper in these conversations. But when we make things inclusive, as I've said before, as a byproduct, we end up being compliant, which is the beautiful thing. But we do have, we are a private post-secondary institution receiving federal funding. And as such, we do have requirements with the Department of Education that we need to comply with. And that includes a few sections of the Rehabilitation Act and the Americans with Disabilities Act. We are required to follow along with those statutes and things that we do. But really the purpose behind all of those legal requirements for making things accessible or providing accommodations is to prevent discrimination. It is to protect individuals from not being able to engage in the same experience as everyone is able to. So the best practices I'm going to go through with us today, they're designed to help us accomplish inclusive practices. They're designed to help us uphold the law in a sustainable way that's really practical and something we can all do. I also want to speak to the scope of the legal requirements, because this can draw up a lot of questions and be information that you might not be aware of. So I will introduce you to it today. But essentially, in terms of what we need to make accessible and who we need to make things accessible for, where does this apply? How far does the scope go? It applies to any program, activity, or service that's offered by LAPU or on behalf of LAPU to students, prospective students, alumni, and the general public. And I kind of filled this in the blank with LAPU, but this list is coming from the actual text of section 504. Essentially, if it's our program, if it's our activity, if it's our service, we must make it accessible to disabled individuals and provide accommodations in needed cases. If it's something provided on our behalf, like tutor.com might be a good example of this. Tutor.com is not our service, but it is a service we are providing on behalf of LAPU to our students, then it needs to be accessible. And yes, I did see Hilda's chat real quick here. It doesn't, all of these practices apply to employees as well. I am not an expert on the employee side necessarily of these regulations, but everything that I am speaking to here today that applies to our student population and visitors and the public, it also falls in alignment with employees as well, for sure. So this applies to everything that we do, and it applies not just to our students, but to visitors that we're reaching online who are checking us out, prospective students. And so when we're speaking about virtual events today, that falls into our activity category. If we are hosting a webinar on study skills or something like that, that is an activity that we are hosting as a university to our student body, and it needs to be accessible in the ways that I'll mention today. And furthermore, it doesn't matter if the activity that we're offering is required or optional. I can see how it can make sense sometimes to think, okay, we've got this webinar that is required to complete for this class, so we need to implement measures to make it accessible because it's required for this course or this program. It expands beyond just that. If it's any activity that we're making available for any student to want to attend, we are required to make sure everyone has the opportunity, the right to attend that live event, whether it's something that's required or not. So I do want to demystify that and make that piece clear. I also want to pause, knowing that there could be some questions about this, and see if anything needs to be addressed in the chat, or if anybody would like to chime in on that, feel free to unmute yourself.
Nothing beyond Hilda's question about the employees, although Lindsay commented that the ADA does cover employees as well.
Indeed. Thank you, HR, for chiming in on the employee particulars of this. Glad you guys are here, because that is a great resource to be thinking about for your teams and employees and things of that nature as well. Okay.
Peggy asks, does this mean scheduled meetings as well?
Scheduled meetings for that involve outside individuals, students, vendors. Yes, we do need to have things that are accessible for them. Internally, you know, this could be something that HR may want to speak to in terms of best practices here for LAPU employees, because I am not the governing authority on that. I think it's great to make that a best practice in our internal meetings with our teams, but typically I know employees have an opportunity to request accommodations for certain things and get that arranged if they need to do that for their work. But for scheduled meetings that we're having with other universities, with visitors, with vendors, with students, with those that we don't know what their barriers are or their needs, we should be making it a best practice to make our meetings virtually as accessible as possible.
Maybe, for example, like these webinars that we host to the public or to our students.
Exactly. Webinars that we're hosting, where we're promoting these to outside institutions that we're hosting for students and promoting. Absolutely, this all applies. Let me know if that is.
Kaylin asks, calls and events with professors. I assume that would be more of an internal.
Correct. Some of these particulars are, you know, things where accommodations may need to be a part of the requested process to make sure that they're in place, but really it's anything that we do. If it's our class, if it's our program, if it's our material, if it's our event, then yes, all of these things are best practices that we should be following, or we should be setting up an accommodation to make sure that someone does have access if they don't.
Great, thanks.
Yeah, lots of nuances for sure. And I know we'll strike up further conversation in terms of how we address this in various ways, which is a part of my goal as a ADA coordinator now for LAPU, is to be working with all of our departments on some of these particulars to set goals and make some achievable advances and a lot of the nuances of how this plays out. But the scope is large, as you can see.
Can I interrupt with one last question
Yeah.
that just popped up? Chelsea asked if you'll be speaking to the difference between accommodations and accessibility in a future webinar.
Perhaps. I don't have any future webinars planned out at this point, but I will definitely take requests for topics for that. In a nutshell, accessibility is what we do universally for everyone who's attending something to create access. An accommodation is a modification that we're making, an adaptation that we're providing that makes something accessible for a particular individual or group of individuals. So if we're making everything accessible, we shouldn't need as many accommodations, which is the true goal. The true win and dream of the accessibility field is to make it so that we don't have to accommodate anyone at all, because everything is just accessible the way that it is. So that's kind of the very quick version of that difference for you all. Great questions, everybody. So here's practice number one. We're going to get into the fun stuff now, which is to talk about the best practices. And I've got 3 different categories of them. Captions is going to be the one that I'm going to lead out with, and is very, very important in terms of our virtual meetings, is that we do need to be making captions available, as we are doing in today's meeting right now. Because we cannot assume, when we have a live event, we cannot assume everyone is able to hear the content of the meeting. And so we need to create provision for that. I know that like our marketing team and our e-learning team is really well versed as we send out recorded material and videos and media. A lot of our teams are very accustomed to making sure captions are provided for those pre-recorded elements. But when we have live events that anyone should be able to attend, regardless of a disability of some kind, we need to be providing captions. And we cannot just direct individuals who need captions to go watch a recorded version rather than attending a live event. So throwing in this example to make this clear as well, if we are not providing captions for an event and someone cannot attend for that reason, and we are just thinking, oh, well, we can just have them attend or listen to the recording of it rather than attending the live thing because we're not going to provide captions, that is presenting discrimination, whether we realize it or not. And that's a huge no-no. So that's something that we cannot do. We need to make things accessible so that anyone could attend the live opportunity if they would like to. And this is very important, of course, for our deaf and hard of hearing audience, those who have auditory processing disorders where just hearing something alone is not sufficient for comprehension. And this is also really helpful for individuals whose first language isn't English. Captions are very helpful for comprehension as well. So let me talk about captioning a little bit. What I'm really excited about is that there are a ton of amazing high quality auto captioning tools that are very readily available in a whole lot of spheres of what we use, especially at LAPU. I've highlighted here. Captioning and auto captioning specifically is becoming more embedded in the fabric of everything that we do, which is awesome in our society. So if you're using Google Meet for a meeting, you have a captioning tool you can activate there. wanted to highlight for Loom videos. Those are all now captioned recordings as well. You used to have a paid account for that feature like months ago, and now it's free for all users. So professors who are using Loom to record all of their introductory videos for their classes in Moodle, those are all captioned now if they're using Loom, which is super exciting. You'll see on Slack, there's captioning available there, which makes me way excited as we're recording things or using video huddles and whatnot. And YouTube as well. If you are uploading any videos to YouTube to make available, they will be auto captioned and you can go in and edit your captions to make them accurate. If you're an Instagram user or a TikTok user and you're looking at reels and short videos, there's auto captioning for a lot of things on social media now. So this is just becoming a prevalent part of how we design things from the get-go, which is awesome. I'm going to get into the nitty-gritty of Zoom for these next few slides here because I know the majority of our virtual webinars and meetings that we are hosting, especially for students and visitors, is over Zoom. If you're working with other platforms that you want to consult me on the tools for it, let me know. But I'm going to spend my time just really driving home what's available for Zoom because this is our popular place that we're doing this from. So I'm going to teach you how to activate the live transcript tool that's available right now for this meeting so that you can all use it. Once again, this feature is now free for all Zoom users. And I'm telling you, just months ago, you had to have a pro account or beyond to have this tool available, but it's now free for all Zoom users, which is great. So you can enable it with any kind of account that you have. It's available for meetings and webinars. So whether you're doing a Zoom meeting or a Zoom webinar, it's available for both. And to teach you a few other things about it, when you activate it, as I did for this meeting today, all of your meeting hosts or panelists have the ability to control it. And by that, I mean turning it on or turning it off. So it must be enabled in your settings first, but whoever's assigned to host or be a panelist has the ability to manipulate it for your audience. And if you are recording your meeting or your webinar to the cloud, the transcript does get recorded with the meeting, which is cool to know. This does not yet work with breakout rooms. That's a sad part. This is one of the kinks that Zoom is trying to work out, is the transcript does not yet work for breakout rooms. Even hiring a professional captioner who's going to provide captions for your meeting, which is something you can do. You can only hire one captioner for one breakout room. There's not good solutions in place for breakout rooms yet, unfortunately. So if that is a limitation for something that you are planning on hosting, let me know, and I'd be happy to talk about ways to troubleshoot that with where we're at. But what you'll want to do to get this feature working for your next Zoom or meeting or webinar is you're going to want to log into your Zoom settings and visit your in-meeting advanced settings and toggle the following switches on to get them set up. The automated caption tool is the main one that you want. Along with that, I recommend just enabling the full transcript being available in the side panel as well. If participants want to view it that way and even be able to search for things in the transcript, it's super cool. Make that available as well. And you can even allow your participants to save the captions or the transcripts to have them to go back to later. So answering Mike's request from earlier, that is something you can enable for people to save the transcript, or you can provide it later. Just to explain what the manual caption feature is, you don't need to enable that. If you were to hire a third-party captioner to provide captioning for your events, which may be something that we do every now and again, that will be what you'll want to enable to give a third party the access to your meeting. But you don't need to activate that. It kind of seems like maybe you would, but you don't for having auto captioning available. So that's how you enable it. That's the first step you'll want to do. The second step is when you start your meeting or your webinar, the first thing you're going to need to do is enable it for your audience to use, which is what I had to do when I got us started today. So you'll visit the live transcript CC button in your Zoom menu and click on the enable auto transcription button. And then you will see it's on. It gives you a notification that it's on. You can also select the checkbox that allows participants to request it. If you're just enabling it for everybody, there's no reason to need to allow your participants to request it because it'll just be on for them. But if there's a situation, I can't think of one, but where you just wanted to not enable it, but allow an individual to make a request for it. Maybe you know everybody in the meeting, maybe it's your team, and you just want to allow your team members to request it if they want it. You'll get a notification that somebody wants you to turn it on. But my recommendation is we're just enabling the auto transcript so that it's available for everybody without needing to request it. Third step is once that's enabled, as I turn this on today, you will see a live feed of everything you're saying coming up on the transcript while you're talking. And I know some of you have dabbled with that, and it can be very distracting to see that while you're trying to lead a webinar or a meeting. So you can go in and hide the subtitle so that you don't have to see it anymore. It's out of your view. It doesn't hide it from everyone else. It just hides it from you. But all of your hosts and all of your panelists have to do that on their own. So if you hide it from your own view, it means that others who are also assigned as hosts will need to do that to hide it from their view as well. Let me just go through a couple other slides here and then I'll pause if there's questions on this technical stuff. But from your participant point of view, here's what they see, here's what you guys will see as you're playing around with it, is they can select the live transcript button, they'll click show subtitle, select that, and they can see it, and they can also adjust the settings. You can increase the font and play around with some other things, or they can select view transcript if they want to view that in the side panel as well. The last piece of this facilitation of this feature is making sure you are informing your audience that it's available. This is a great accessibility practice to make sure people know that an event they're attending is accessible for them as a part of how you're hosting it. So what you can do is, it's a very simple process of just a one-liner at the opening of your event where you can inform your audience verbally and in the chat by both seeing and hearing that they can access the live transcript. And I recommend that you do it this way. Just state an instruction about that at the front end of your meeting. So as you're introducing your speakers, as you are going over housekeeping rules, as you're talking about how your audience can engage with you during the meeting in the chat or the Q&A, etc., you can just state something very quickly that says, if you'd like to use captions for today's event, use the live transcript feature in your menu, and you can use that today. I've got some canned language that I will send to all of you in my follow-up resource to this meeting that just gives you the line, gives you the text, gives you what to copy paste in the chat. I've got it available so that you don't have to think of it on the spot. You can just pull it up with a checklist. You can add it to your own event checklist if you have something that you use. And this, I know, it'll take some practice. It takes some, this is new. This is not something that we're used to doing with Zoom, but I guarantee you, as we make it a practice for every Zoom meeting, it will become an automatic behavior. It'll just become a part of how we're thinking about how we do events, and we won't think about it twice. But I've tried to create some things to make that easy and sustainable for you to implement in your events. Want to pause for questions or comments here. I know this is all some technical stuff here with Zoom, but any questions on this? Anything that needs clarification here?
No comments, but Peggy is eager for your resources because they have a webinar tomorrow, and
I got you, Peggy.
They want to try and implement this in that webinar.
Great. I will.
I have one next week, so I'm eager for it as well.
I will get that all to you as quick as I can so that you can implement this starting right now.
I do have a question about how to do it when you're the host and you have, like, the host is from, it's recording from me. And is that where I have to enable it actually in my settings like you explained, or do I actually enable it on the Zoom settings right in the meeting?
You will enable the Zoom settings at any time. Once they're on there, this feature will always be available at anything you're hosting ever once you've turned it on in your advanced meeting settings. So any one of you could do this right now to just get yourself set up permanently to have it available. But once you start your actual event, you've hit start meeting or start webinar, then you're going to want to go in and click on this enable auto transcription to make it live for that event that you're doing right then and there. Let me know if that does not make sense, but requires a couple steps. Any other questions on that?
Yeah, further clarification from Kaylin, who was also chatting what I'm thinking. It's a preset setting that you turn on in the web control panel. And once it's on, it's on. You don't have to set that for every single meeting.
Correct. Yeah. So just like you set up all of your meetings to record automatically, and you go in, you log into your Zoom account and make that set up so that every meeting you ever do is recorded. It's the same thing with the automated captions setting. So you can do that prior to anything, but there's a second step for you, which is to enable it when you start your actual event.
In the meeting. Okay.
Correct. Yeah. And if you ever want to practice around with me prior to anything and run through this before you're doing anything live to get a feel for it, please, I'm open to doing that with any of you. And yes, both have to be done. So both have to be done, just to make that perfectly clear, in order for this to be available for your audience. Okay. I'm going to move on to the last piece of this captioning part here. And that is another best practice is if you are playing a video during your meeting, showing some media, those should also have visible captions to your audience as well. So it's important to find versions of videos that do have captions, and that way you can activate them. So as you're sharing your screen and sharing the video, everyone is seeing the captions while you're playing the video from your computer. That is very important too. If there aren't captions available with the media that you're playing, consult me on that so that I can help further resource you in those instances. Okay, I'm going to head into our next practice here. You guys are doing great, hanging with me with lots of information today. But our second practice that really makes a huge impact with accessibility is learning how to refine our verbal description of images that we're showing. Once again, as we're showing visual materials, we cannot assume everyone can see it. It requires a little bit of extra energy and effort to make sure that someone who might not have visible access to what we're showing is able to get the meaning of what it is that we're going through. And with virtual events specifically, this comes up in two primary ways. How we navigate through things on our screen. We do a lot of that at LAPU. We do a lot of webinars and a lot of tutorials, a lot of videos where we're helping students navigate through a site. And we have to be mindful of the fact that not everyone may be able to see what we're doing. Secondarily, as we are showing images, graphs, charts, infographics in our presentations, we cannot assume that everyone is able to see the images that we're showing. So the solution that you can do very simply and quickly is to provide some sufficient, simple verbal descriptions that convey the meaning of what you're showing. This is instrumental for our blind, low vision population, or those that have visual or spatial barriers where just tracking what's happening on a screen is something that could be quite difficult. So I'm going to start with an example of this for you all and get us kind of engaged a little bit more here in an experience of what this is actually like. I'm hopping over to my.lapu.edu. And I'm going to pretend like I'm hosting a webinar right now, and I'm going to show participants how to log into the courses site. And what I'd like for you all to do is actually close your eyes for a moment and put yourself in a position of not being able to see anything that I'm about to do. You're just listening to this webinar. So if you'll close your eyes with me, you can listen to the way that I go about this. I'm going to lead with an example of how this is done inaccessibly. Okay, so here we go. So from the my.lapu.edu page, you'll click here. You'll be prompted to sign in. Click that. And then you will be logged into your courses site. Okay, I'm done with that first part. So as you could probably hear, obviously, when I say things like click here, click there, nobody knows what I'm talking about if they're not able to see. But we can do it in a different way that is quite accessible. So I'm going to do this again. And you can close your eyes for a second time. And I'm going to model doing this in an accessible approach for us to get the gist of it. So from my.lapu.edu, select the courses button. You'll be prompted at that point to choose an email account. You'll select your LAPU email. And from that point, you'll be logged into my courses. Okay, you guys can all open your eyes. So here's the slight switch of what I just did as I get my presentation back up for you. Is rather than saying click on, click here, click there, I said select instead. And I named the label of the button or the header that I was clicking on. By just defining what we're clicking on and where we're going with a specific name of what it is. So rather than saying here, say courses button or resources or whatever it might be. Not everyone who is attending our events is necessarily using a mouse. Not everyone's clicking. Individuals might be using a screen reader or a different type of device to navigate their site. We can't assume everyone is using that. People can also be on a mobile device and things might look and appear and feel differently for them. So by replacing click on or click here with select, that's very accessible language, rather than saying scroll, because not everyone who's attending our events might be scrolling with anything. That doesn't apply. You'll want to say navigate to. Anyone who's not able to see who's attending your event is going to be listening for these cues to help them know what to look for when they're finding it on their own. If you have a blind participant, they're very well versed in how to listen for these cues. So by just making a little simple tweaks to the words we're using, it makes it so easy for anyone to follow along with where they need to go. So those are some simple things that we can implement there. Images is the next thing. As we are showing graphs and charts and things that are really important, a critical part of the content of our presentation, especially with slides or docs, we can't assume everyone can see these images that we are putting on our slides. So it's important to think about what is the takeaway meaning of the image or the graph or the chart you're presenting, and make sure you're just verbalizing that to your audience in addition to the image. I've just got a fun example for us of looking at a study done on, favorite types of pizza from different regions of the country. So what I could say in an inaccessible fashion is I could say, as you can see, regions around the country all have different preferences of what kind of pizza they like. Guess we can tell who likes deep dish. If I said it that way, nobody knows who cannot see what I'm got here on the screen, what this is in reference to. But if I say something like, in 2019, deep dish pizza was most popular for Midwesterners and least popular for Northeasterners, and I just verbally say what I want my audience to know about this, then it makes it accessible. You don't need to go through every single number, every bar, every label, but what are your main points from this image that you want your audience to walk away with? That is something you'll want to just visibly state. Here's another quick example. Let's say I've got a really cool infographic on growth mindset that I'm making available. What I could say is, as you see here, success is like an iceberg. There's things that people see in your success that's not very much, and the majority is what people don't see, and just move on. And that doesn't convey everything that's available here for someone to walk away with from this image. So instead, I could just verbalize this a little bit more and just say, I've got an image here of an illusion of success being like an iceberg. And you can only see a third of the iceberg from above the water. And that's like how success is. There's a third of it, a small percentage that people see, but the majority of the iceberg is below the water. And that encapsulates what people don't see, which is things like dedication, hard work, discipline, disappointment, sacrifice, failure, and persistence. And you'll see I did that in such a way where I'm not even calling out that I'm making it accessible at all. I'm just emphasizing the image. I'm just driving home the point behind it for everybody. And if someone's not able to see this, then they can be fully included in the image that you're showing and what that is conveying. So hoping that is really helpful for you guys. Some really simple tweaks that make a really big difference with visuals.
There's a number of comments in the chat that are really appreciative of these examples that you're providing. It's helping it to connect with people
Awesome.
in the practice. So thank you.
Great. And I know it takes practice. It takes practice for me too, to stop and think about some of these things. And I've got some bullet points in the checklist that I'm sending to you all that just give you a little reminder right before your event to think about that and implement those practices. All right, I'm going to really fly through my very last section here and end with my last point so that I've got some sufficient time left over to hear any questions or hear any comments that you all may want to have space to share. But I get a lot of questions about give me some tips for how we make slide design more accessible. And I do want to address some practices with that too. And this applies to more than just slides, anything visual, docs, PDFs, things that we're creating, ways that we can make them accessible that is a game changer for those who have low vision or dyslexia or color blindness or visual processing disorders of some kind. You'll want to be selective about the kind of fonts that you use. There's a group of fonts called sans serif, which is the recommendation. They're more user-friendly for the eye. And basically you can Google what sans serif fonts are. These are some popular ones that I can recommend, but there's more. And they're basically a group of fonts that are more non-script-like. They're just easier for the eyes to decipher in terms of selecting your font. Font size is important too. For slides, the ideal size is 18 or above. You want to make sure you're using a font size that is large enough for your audience to be able to see. Avoid too much text on your slides. This is a big one. Got an example of something that's way too much text. You're going to want to boil that down. And a good rule of thumb I like to keep in mind, I've even been a student, I've sat in class where my professor is trying to read a slide like this aloud to the class, and they get lost and they lose their place and they can't even follow along with how to present their slide. If you have a hard time reading it aloud to your audience, then consider that it's too much. It's great to create an overview slide for your presentation with an agenda, your goals, your sections, kind of a clear organizational structure with bullet points and sufficient space between your lines of text. Just having a clear system of organization just makes it so much better for your participants to follow along. Contrast is a big deal as well, especially with looking at the background color of your slide and the font color that you're using. Having insufficient contrast can be a real barrier. I will warn you, a lot of the slide templates that are out there are not very accessible in terms of their contrast. They're not designed with that in mind as popularly yet, but I'm going to equip you all with a really easy color contrast checker that you can pull up online, take an image, drop it in and select the foreground color and your background color, and it will actually tell you if it's ADA compliant or not in seconds as a great double check that you can implement. Color coding. My team knows this is one of my #1 accessibility pet peeves is when we rely upon color coding alone to convey the meaning of something. It's not that we can't use color coding. We just can't make that the only way that someone can understand the information. You know, if I wanted to do a little pie chart, I've got an example here of favorite pizza toppings. Some consider pineapple a topping, some don't. It's a big controversial issue, I understand. But if I'm red-green colorblind and I've got a pie chart using those colors, it's going to look like this, a big brown blob to somebody, and you cannot understand the meaning of it. But here's what you can do. You can use color coding, but add some other distinguishing characteristics that allow someone to distinguish the information. That might be text, that might be boundary lines or labels on a chart, that could be shapes or shading. There's different ways to do it. Those are some examples as an extra layer to think about. So those are some great tips for slides. Last thing today, you guys have done really great listening to me for a long time this morning. But my last point is, as we implement all of these great practices for virtual events, there are going to be some cases, you know, to Chelsea's point earlier about accessibility versus accommodations. It'll just be a matter of time before accommodations will be needed for a virtual event for one reason or another. My prime example of where I see that coming up is like someone needs a sign language interpreter for an event that we are doing. There's other cases as well. I'm prepared to help us facilitate and coordinate those requests as an institution, but it's going to require that we allow individuals to actually request an accommodation for events ahead of time as much as possible. And where I'd like to really see this happen is for any live event that we're doing for students or visitors, where we have attendees that we don't know whether or not they do need an accommodation, that we should be including a form and a one-liner in our promotional materials that just allows individuals to request an accommodation ahead of time. I have a form ready for that can be used for any event that I will monitor, and I will give you language of how you can put that in your marketing emails and make that available. But that's something I'm highly stressing that we start incorporating anything that we're hosting for students or visitors, making this a permanent practice. I need to learn this process too. And so I'm going to be working with Tara in the near future for our new student orientations to pilot this for our orientations, because that's a great opportunity to test this out for students that might need particular accommodations. So I will keep us all in the loop on this together as we're hosting events, but I do want us to be prepared for these instances that you can coordinate with me on in those events. All right, I'm stopping so that I have a few minutes of time available for questions and comments on that before I let you all go. So anything in the chat or anything anybody wants to chime in with here?
Well, Hilda's reconsidering the slide template that she's using in a presentation tomorrow. And Chelsea shared a couple of tips when writing emails that you've shared with her previously about bolding and underlining text instead of using colors to highlight certain areas.
Yeah, there's so many things to think about. I am very aware of it. And my heart is to make this like some bite-sized pieces we can chew and implement and do in a sustainable way without anybody feeling overwhelmed with everything you're doing and questioning it all. So feel free to chat with me if you want to about anything specifically, but I know this is a learning curve for us all. Other questions, comments? Got 3 more minutes today.
If I can chime in, I think one of the things that's the most empowering to me is that I just never knew I needed to be paying attention for that stuff.
Yeah.
And none of it's super hard, you know, it's easy. It's just that we have to be thoughtful about it. And so I'm really encouraged that this isn't a hassle. This is just me learning how to care better for people in some ways that are really accessible to me. It's not going to take learning all new technology or anything, you know?
It's a great point, Tara. You don't know until you know. And now that you know, you'll see these things everywhere around you and you'll spot them out and you'll be an expert on these topics. All right.
A lot of thanks popping up in the chat right now.
Thank you, Megan.
Well, thank you all for being here. I'm here for you as you have other questions or things, or you want to play around with Zoom or things are not clear there. And